My brain's so awfully glad to be here for yet another mindless day. I've got all morning to obsessively crew a small nation of meaningful objects. They've gotta represent me too. By this afternoon I'll live in debt. By tomorrow be replaced by children. How many people rise and think, oh good, the stranger's body's still here. Our arrangement hasn't changed. I've got a lifetime to consider all the ways I've grown more disappointing to you as my beauty warps and fades. I suspect you feel the same. I was young, I dreamt of a passionate obligation to a roommate. Is this the part where I get all I ever wanted? Who said that? Can I get my money back? Just a little bored in the USA. Oh, just a little bored in the USA. Save me, white Jesus, bored in the USA. Oh, they gave me a useless education, subprime loan, my prescriptions filled. Now I can't get it off, but I can kind of deal. Born in the USA. Oh, just a little born in the USA. Save me, President Jesus, I'm born in the USA. How did it happen? Born in
This highly produced reading for all of you, my faithful listeners, is brought to you by Le Café Verfilcht. And the first part of The White-Clothed Oarsman, entitled His Fever is Broken, is what you shall endure. And I begin after I quickly drink a little more. This is Elliott Limb. The night before, Ronnie's stance rocked the table as his beer's foam head burst. He slammed his Budweiser harder than he meant. A mushroom cloud of bubbles spread around his mug into the middle of the table, leaking through the cracks. It dripped to the gravel floor. Pieces of Glass shrapnel were still landing 10 feet away in good old boys' spirits. "God-damned reckless bastard," they said. A few of them stood raising their fists and wiping sweat and tobacco juice from around their mouths. They gave their wallets to their honeys and told them, "Buy another round." "But baby, you promised this would be your last," the lady said, moaning and groaning. They lived in Alabama, they married alcoholics. A sweet-looking barmaid grabbed a brown and yellow-stained rag. Rushing to the rescue, she swayed her giant hips back and forth to the rhythm of drunk perverts' eyes scanning her body up and down. Wringing used water from the towel with her hands, she grunted and pursed her lips into a prune-shaped mess. Hoots and hollers, cat calls, she blushed as she bent down to the floor and heard quarters pinging. They zipped through the air into the middle of an empty Folgers tip cup. She said, "Next round's on the house." The threat of the brawl died. She saved the day. He wanted to thank her. Ronnie dropped the handle from the glass he destroyed and stuffed a so moist, $5 bill into the barmaid's blouse as she stood. She was taken aback as Ronnie's eyes lingered in the middle of her breasts. They were on full display. A woman's property is private. She shared no interest in keeping her tits secret. The tender pink thing slipped into view every 10 minutes as a routine. She needed to earn those quarters. Her busty pair was a pet to the usual drunks stumbling into her dive. They handed her tips, feeding a bitch as if it was their dog. They valued their German shepherds more than her. Their dogs birthed valuable litters. She smiled at Ronnie and jigged with her arms around her neck as Ronnie growled a primal scream. He lunged toward her open-mouthed and displayed his green, jagged teeth, years of bar tiffs. The sweetheart stumbled backward as the stench from Ronnie's mouth invaded her olfactory. Ronnie said as he grabbed her neck, "You tricking whore. I just tipped $5, 2 hours' wages." The table next to Ronnie jumped into action and grabbed his shoulders. They threw him to the vomit-stained floor. The 4 brutes knelt and swung their arms. Balled fists tomahawked his face and chest and groin, stroking an onslaught of cheers amongst enthusiastic onlookers. Drunk or sober, the patrons wanted Ronnie to pay for zapping the color from the beautiful barmaid's cheeks, usually so rosy. Her cheeks were porridge gray, but without the sugar. Sloppy and sagging, tear-stained cheeks trying to keep courage, but she coughed, still struggling for air. An older gentleman, a beautiful, nameless soul, approached her with an old rusted skinning knife. He said, "Honey, I ain't ever talked to you, but I'm gonna make this right." He extended his left arm and took the knife to his palm, sliding it back and forth until he saw blood. He stuffed the antique knife under his armpit and dabbed the wound with his ring finger, pulling her close, as emotions were high within the crowd. He smeared the crimson juice across her cheeks until they were proud and confident with color. 1, 2, 3. Suddenly 17 quarters rang across the barroom floor and into her Folgers cup. She went back to work, soaking up the wasted beer, but still wheezing. Ronnie, meanwhile, was black and blue on the floor. But the barmaid Savior's arms were losing speed. Before long, they tired of Ronnie and resumed their dominoes match. After all, a $10 bill was on the line, and a dead person isn't fun to bludgeon. They called the bartender to clean the mess, and he signaled the spicy, red-cheeked barmaid to attend it. She was experienced and prepared. This type of situation was all too common. It's Alabama. Escaping out the back entrance, she returned, pushing a run-down wheelbarrow covered in blood and hair and teeth, dried, pasted on. She rushed it to Ronnie's side and scanned the bar, pleading for help. There were no volunteers. The old man who'd cut his hand leaned his head on the bar table and passed out. The bartender tapped his head with a bottle opener, gurgling groans. The bartender lost his patience and hurled the old man to his back. He smashed his head, and a puddle of blood pooled under his long gray hair. The bartender mouthed to the barmaid, He's next. She rolled her eyes and struggled to put Ronnie in the wheelbarrow, her blouse doused in Ronnie's red glaze, but she did the job, and Ronnie lay crumpled in the well-worked wheelbarrow. He was ready for disposal. She pushed him to the exit and propped the door with a chunk of firewood unused the previous winter. Behind the old-fashioned tavern, there was a river where she'd dumped things often before. Not necessarily humans, though. This was new. She rolled to the edge of a steep ravine and tilted the wheelbarrow forward. It rained all day. The ground was muddy and slippery. In her heels, the beautiful barmaid found herself in a bad situation. She leaned the wheelbarrow higher, but Ronnie wasn't moving. His goddamned jaw was stuck on the edge. She shook the wheelbarrow. She jumped up and she jumped down. But she lost her senses, and then her heel broke. And the bitch, she fell over the edge. Ronnie fell with her. As she held onto his tie, the last thing the bluff barmaid saw before it all went dark was Ronnie coming at her with his mouth open. She died, but Ronnie didn't. He was never dead, and the beautiful barmaid sensed through the whole ordeal a faint heartbeat. She dumped him into the wheelbarrow, but she declined to save his life. It manifested itself as a choice she never regretted. She died. The next morning, a boat filled by white-clothed, clean-cut believers, rowing their way through daily exercises, happened across an unfortunate couple sprawled on the rocky shores of their Alabama river. They paddled to them. To their surprise, one was alive. The rowers grabbed him and tossed the dead lady quite haphazardly aside. Rushing to their encampment, they could save his life. Months, weeks, days, whatever the toll. It was a duty manifested by the one they loved, always working to outmeasure their bad deeds. This would be the thing to get them through heaven's pearly gates. A fever, a coma. If only they could bring him back. But 2 weeks later, and hope ran thin, the ensemble of good-hearted communalists reserved a hollow grave and huddled around him. They meant to put a bullet through his temple as he rested in the bottom of their crude grave, just 3 feet deep. One man cocked his Colt revolver, and some spectators closed their eyes. They held back sobs while squeezing their hands tight. Though his heart still thumped, they thought it more fit sending him to the devil and his demons, or to the good Lord with his virgins sitting atop his lap. The moment arrived, and the gunman pointed the barrel downward, determined to turn the metal a glowing orange and put his end to the misery. He noticed beads of sweat glimmering off the man's forehead. More started appearing on his stomach and his legs and his arms. It meant only one thing. The fever was broken. One by one, the men started saying, "His fever has broken. His fever has broken." The stranger's eyes opened, and the group's cheers sang in unison with a nest of whistling mockingbirds perched on the branches of a giant oak. It was a miracle claimed by Reverend Beat. The last to touch Ronnie Stance's naked body before his fever broke in August, Alabama. And yeah, that highly produced rendition of His Fever's Broken was brought to you by Le Café Verfilched, is read by Elliott Limb. Part 2, entitled The White Clothed Oarsman, is sure to enthrall all of you. And with a little bit of outro music, here once again is Father John Misty. If I can just give me a second.
Oh,